just 5 measures long, the intro riff to Old Man by Neil Young is a shining example of compositional prowess, a treasure trove of interesting guitar techniques, and most importantly, really fun to play. Let's take it apart. You can find the tab for the entire song, not just the opening riff that we're learning here, in the description. The riff contains 2 chords, D minor 9 and D major. We're on the D minor 9 for 3 measures and the D major for 2 measures. The D minor 9 is played like this, with our first finger on the 5th fret of the G string, our 3rd finger on the 6th fret of the B string, and the D and high E strings open. And the D major is just a regular old open D major shape, so 1st and 2nd fingers on the 2nd fret of the G and high E strings respectively, and the 3rd finger on the 3rd fret of the B string with our D string open. Now, just because we're only playing 2 chords in this riff, that doesn't mean our left hand gets to take the day off. One of the ways Neil Young is able to make this simple 2-chord intro still sound interesting is by using a lot of hammer-ons and pull-offs. In fact, there's one of those in each of our 5 measures. On the D minor 9 chord, the hammer-ons happen on the G string. So he lifts his first finger and hammers from the open G back up to the 5th fret. On the D major, he does hammer-ons and pull-offs, both on the high E string. The hammer-on is from the open string back up to the 2nd fret, and the pull-off is from the 3rd fret with his 4th finger back down to the 2nd fret. To get that pull-off to sound loud enough, you're going to want to pull downward toward the floor, so you're kind of plucking the string with your pull-off finger. So I'd recommend pausing the video right here and practicing those 3 moves. The D minor 9 hammer-on, the D major hammer-on, and the D major pull-off. That way, when we get to the strumming, you've already worked on that left-hand stuff, and you're not going to have to learn new left-hand techniques and new strumming patterns at the same time. It's always faster to learn techniques separately and then combine them than it is to try to learn multiple techniques all at once. Speaking of strumming patterns, let's take a look at what your right hand is going to be doing in this riff. First off, you're going to be palm muting. If you're not familiar with palm muting, it's a technique that involves muting the strings as you play them with the edge of your right hand. So the term palm muting is kind of a misnomer because you're not actually using your palm, you're using the side of your hand. You can control the amount of muting you get by sliding your hand one way or the other. The further toward the fretboard you go, the more muted the strings will be. So play with that and make sure that you're still hearing the pitch of the notes, not just the percussive effects of the strumming. You're usually going to want to have some of your hand actually on the bridge here, as opposed to fully on the strings. The way Neil Young plays this, he's really just muting the low strings and leaving the B and high E strings mostly unmuted. That might sound like a really advanced technique, but actually it's kind of just what naturally happens with palm muting. Muting all the strings puts your hand in a position where you can't really strum. So realistically, when palm muting, you're limited in how many strings you can mute at once. You're also limited in how many strings you can strum at once because your hand is kind of tied to the strings here, which means you're going to be using your wrist a lot more than your elbow, and that results in a much smaller range of motion. And you can hear this on the recording. If you listen closely, you'll notice that he's only hitting 2 or 3 strings at a time. Okay, so strumming patterns. Just about every measure in this riff uses a slightly different pattern. For measure 1, we're doing down, 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 up, down, up. And remember how I said there's a hammer-on or a pull-off in every measure. In measure 1, that happens on the 2nd beat. We lift our first finger on the 2 count and do a hammer-on on the and of 2. 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and. Measure 2 is down, down, up, down, up, down, up. And our hammer-on comes right after the first strum. We lift our first finger on beat 1 this time and hammer on the and of 1. So 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and. Measure 3 is exactly the same as measure 2. Measure 4 is when we move to the D major chord, and our strumming pattern for that is down, 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 up, down. The hammer-on in this measure happens on beat 2, and this time we're doing it with our 2nd finger, so 1, 2, and 3, and 4. And our last measure, measure 5, is where we do our pull-off. Our strumming pattern here is actually the same as it is in measures 2 and 3, so down, down, up, down, up, down, up. And the pull-off comes right away we bring our fourth finger down on the very first strum and then pull off back to the second fret on the and of one. One, and. And then there's one more thing going on in this measure. For the last three strums, we lift our second finger and play all three of those strums like this with the high E string open. So measure 5 all together. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So that's the riff. If you want to play the entire intro section, all you have to do is repeat this 5-measure riff 2 more times, so you'll play it 3 times total, and then play the first 3 measures, so just the D minor 9 part of it, 1 more time, and that's a whole intro. So 3 times through the whole riff, and 1 more time through just the first 3 measures. For such a short riff, there is a lot to say about the compositional skill on display here. Let's start with just the length of the phrase. In music, we're used to even numbers, often multiples of 4. So 4 beats in a measure, 2 to 4 beats in a phrase, 4 to 8 phrases in a section. So just the fact that this riff is 5 measures long is kind of unusual. To me, the extended phrasing gives it a kind of meditative quality, like we're not quite moving along at the pace we expect to, we're just sitting with this thought for a while we wait for the song to kick into gear. And then there's that D minor 9 chord, or as I like to call it, the old man chord. Now, I know it's just one chord, and minor 9 chords aren't that unusual, but in all of the hundreds of songs I've learned, I've never seen this particular voicing of this chord anywhere else. It's almost like once Neil Young wrote this song, he kind of owned that chord. I know, at least for me, when I hear that chord, I immediately think of this song, and that is really tough to do as a songwriter. There are so many songs out there with so many chords. To come up with a chord voicing that's so unique that you instantly know the song as soon as you hear it is quite a feat. Lastly, the fact that the entire chord progression is just 2 D chords. What? That's so weird, and it should not work as well as it does. Almost by definition, a chord progression needs to take you somewhere, and writing a progression that consists of 2 chords that share the same root note just goes against basic compositional sense. And yet, somehow, it totally works. There's tension and resolution and a feeling of movement, all within this very simple 2-chord progression. We're in the key of D major, which makes our old man chord, or the D minor 9, a minor 1 chord, and our D major a regular diatonic major 1 chord. Our D minor 9 has a D in the bass, which is a root note, a C on the G string, which is a minor 7th, an F on the B string, which is a minor 3rd, and an E on the high E string, which is a 9th. Our D major chord also has a root on the open D string, an A, which is a 5th on the G string, another D root on the B string, and an F sharp, which is a major 3rd on the high E string. Because our 2 chords are located in different fretboard positions, if we want to see how all the notes we're playing fit into the key, we're going to need to outline 2 different D major scales. One up here in 5th position where we're playing 2 out of the 4 notes of the D minor 9 chord, and one down here in open position where we're playing the D major chord and the other 2 notes of the D minor 9. The scale pattern that encompasses the C and F notes up here in our D minor 9 chord is a multi-octave pattern starting on this D right here on the 5th fret of the A string, and it consists of a first finger pattern, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, followed by a 4th finger pattern, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. Now, I know that scale doesn't have either of our 2 chord notes in it, which might be kind of confusing. The reason that neither of those notes are in the scale is that those 2 notes are outside of the key of D major. They're non-diatonic. That doesn't mean we're not in the key of D major, it just means we have a couple notes that don't fit into the key. So if we want to describe how these 2 notes relate to our key, we're going to have to use some qualifying language. The closest note we have to our C in the D major scale is C sharp, which is scale degree 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we're going to call our C natural here, which is a half step lower than scale degree 7, a flat 7. And similarly, while there isn't an F in the D major scale, there is an F sharp, which is scale degree 3. 1, 2, 3. So we're going to call our F natural, which is a half step lower than F sharp, a flat 3. The scale patterns we're using down here in our open position are actually more or less the same patterns as we're using in 5th position, just moved to a different part of the fretboard. We have our first finger pattern starting on the open D string, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, followed by a partial 4th finger pattern, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that shows us where the other 2 notes in our D minor 9 chord fit into the key. Our D is of course scale degree 1, and the E is scale degree 2. 1, 2. So let's think about that for a second. We just figured out that that D minor 9 chord consists of scale degrees 1, flat 7, flat 3, and 2. Rearrange those and you can see that that's just 4 consecutive scale degrees. 7, 1, 2, 3. If you know anything about how chords are usually built, that should strike you as very unusual. You rarely see that kind of thing in pop music. The D major chord is much more straightforward, consisting of 2 scale degree 1s on the D and B strings, a scale degree 5 on the G string, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a scale degree 3 on the high E string, 1, 2, 3. Real quick before we get to the demos, thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. And if you have any requests for what song you want me to do next, you can leave those in the comments.